Hello everyone, my name is Pearlescent Moon and welcome back to another video. This video idea is basically a stem of my world transformation video, and I thought it would be fun to expand the concept. Today I'll be transforming my first Minecraft house from that video, but in 5 different ways or themes. I wanted to see what else I could do with the house and to give myself a bit of a challenge coming up with different structure types to build in. I'll also be leaving a world download to this house in the description if anyone would like to transform it for themselves as their own challenge. On the off chance you do, I'd love to see it and even showcase it in one of my future videos with full credit, which you can send to me either via my Twitter, Discord or email, which all will be linked in the description. Regardless, let's stop this introduction here and get right into it. The first thing I did was research some structure inspiration images. From that, I would then pick my palette. I really felt like making the building pop, so I picked some orange acacia wood, red sandstone and regular sandstone to mix together. The contrast between the two helps create elements of interest to direct people around the build, as well as create distinctions between each section. A common problem I had while transforming this house is that on one side, you had this super small shack thing, and on the other side you had this 3-story tall, oddly shaped observation tower. They just didn't match too well scale-wise, so more often than not I did add a few levels of height onto the small hut. I did this for the first transformation by deciding to add some narrow towers. I didn't want to add too much overall volume, so I left air in the supports instead of blocking it with walls. However, later did add a small solid tower off to the side to make it feel a bit more asymmetrically balanced with the taller centerpiece. The roof style I was going for held a shallow curve that transfers up to a fine point. It gave a hint of a slight Asian architecture inspired feel to it, which I quite liked. I decided to keep the regular glass pane windows from the original, as it added a somewhat modern vibe to it, yet at the same time was pulling toward traditional architecture roots. Continuing on, I transformed the balcony running from the hut into a walled off section. They're both connected through a path running between the middle of both structures, so I didn't have to worry about another entry or exit point. Upside down stairs served as a bit of a banister without being too solid and created some airflow through the build. I added further detail through the structure by incorporating red sandstone walls and acacia fences. I found I liked the shape that they contributed to the build. After adding those pieces, I added a small garden at the front just to give it a bit of a nature aesthetic. And well, I like gardens, so it made sense for me. During this phase, I decided to add sand as the base terrain block at the front, as I feel it really made the structure appear at home. It felt like the build belonged in a desert. Given I do have the grass still surrounding the build behind the back, but I think I like how it kind of added a bit of separation at the front. Soldiering on to the observation tower, I started off by removing that tree blocking the view on the front, and then changed some of the oak wood to sandstone to match the other structure sections. Wait a minute, hold on guys, I just gotta add this tower in the middle with a balcony to fill some space, cause I like to jump around when I'm building. Don't mind me. Okay, so coming back to the tower, I continued to replace the blocks with our sandstone mix. Overall, I don't like the shape of the observation tower very much, so I felt like adding a piece jutting off the left side to give it some width and shape. I furthermore did the same to the right side, but added a bit of a floaty structural piece to the top, so it wouldn't just end in a flat roof cut. Although, I also decided not to remove the lone jungle tree in any of the 5 transformations. I ultimately felt like adding a couple custom branches to liven it up a bit in this first design. Detail-wise, the upside-down stairs on the roof rims and the added balconies throughout just add a bit more shape and depth to the overall look and feel. Balconies also allow for some easy lantern hanging. To finish up the front section, I transformed the stairs off to the side into a bit more neater and refined sandstone version, then just added a bit of greenery. Moving on to the back portion, it's pretty much all the same explanation as the front by changing up the palette and adding details, with the exception of a taller structural portion being added on top of the observatory. It felt too flat, and I wanted to add that feeling of a thin but high architectural style we seem to be going with at the front. The lines of regular sandstone within the build help add some separation so we don't have too many large sections of a flat textured wall. Alright, time for transformation number 2. This time I got inspired by how buried the shack originally was within the terrain, so I decided to play on that concept and go for a hobbit hole style. Research was made and the palette was chosen. This build was basically me chucking dirt all over the structure that was already there in the hopes to turn it into some sort of wacky terrain shape. Of course, I also changed the block type to a bit more of a natural texture. Stripped birchwood seemed to fit for this, as well as show the connection between found inspiration and my build. Again, I also added more height to the little shack on the right, by adding an extra level that I embedded into the terrain. I was a little stuck at first on how to approach the observation tower, but eventually just decided to cake dirt on it and see where it went. During this, I added a small balcony that then acted a bit like a cliff overhang. This helps just to give it a bit more shape. After fiddling with the tower, I felt like adding in some stone pathing to really help set the scene. Gone were the structural staircases and added in were the slightly more carved stone ones. Now, this is the time where I start to add a bit of depth and tone variance. I decided to add a bit of spruce plank edging to make it feel like it had at least some sort of structural roof or support to hold all that dirt cascading over the edges. I did this for all door sections within this particular transformation. To increase atmosphere and structural placement, I added a stone garden wall that kind of wound through the terrain and segmented the landscape itself. You may recognize this type of wall from my last transformation video. I do admit I enjoy making them. I then added some greenery with leaves, mixing in some birch with oak to add more variance. In the middle of all of this, I added a rough clothesline and campfire to make it feel like it was an environment that was lived in. Add in some more flowers, grass, small structural details, and then a cute chimney, and we can move around to the back. As you can see, I worked solely on the front prior, so had a big hole where I added that second level to the house. I started out by fixing it up to look like the back of a hill, and continued the terraforming over to the observation deck. It kind of reminded me of a cave up the top when wrapped, so I removed the wooden support pieces and made it look a bit like a terrain wave, as I may call it. I then added some fencing around the sides to make it look like it was still a lived-in residence. To finish off the whole build, I just added in more of that winding stone wall and some garden refreshers. All the while not forgetting to mix in some andesite and walls to add that extra bit of detail and interest. Now let's move on to the next. With this one I did intend to go for a bit of a medieval style, however in the end it kind of turned into a bit of a mix with suburban, which I didn't really mind. At first I thought I was going to go full stripped dark oak log as the base, but then later looked through multiple inspiration sources and decided to split it with some bone block. Many old medieval buildings seem to have a white and brown split, so I thought it would somewhat fit, all the while adding my own twist to it. The stone base and dark oak bottom lines I added helps the structure feel more stable, especially considering we've made it a bit more top heavy by adding in that second jutting layer. In terms of the roof, I first thought a stone rim would work, but felt it conflicted with the stone base and went with a more neutral terracotta and brick vibe. I felt it kind of complemented the brown hue to the build, but yet contrasted enough to essentially show off the roof. It seemed like a lot of medieval buildings had basic triangular roofs, so I just decided to roll with that. I didn't want the offset secondary level to feel awkward, so I added a bit of a trapdoor, spruce slab and stair combo that makes it look like it's supporting the rest of the structure. I also wanted to add more height, so I just added a small tower in the middle. For this build in particular, I felt like simplistic stone section walls worked nicely as a garden divider. This to me is essentially the same as I did in the Hobbit hole build. It's just more structured and refined. Same kind of concept. The house would have typically been found within some sort of suburbia rather than wilderness vibe. Moving on to the observation tower, I again transferred the style from the once small hut onto the tall and bulky frame. I split up the levels by adding roofing along the edges, which created more depth to the build. The flat nature of the original glass roof was transferred to an A-frame style to match the rest of the architecture. Like the other versions, I have to add my garden work. Some simple leaf blocks acted as bushes, and fences with leaves strewn on them act as small trees. Red flowers were added just for a bit of colour in there. Spruce, trapdoor type fencing was used to top the stone walls just to split up the stone mass a bit. I didn't want to overload on grey, and it keeps it in theme with the houses. I realised in the video playback that campfires almost look comical with how fast that smoke moves. They're so serene in game at normal speed, and they appear so rapid in the playback due to the time-lapse nature. Anyway, I don't actually have too much to say about the back portion, as it's just transferring the style to the back. So let's move on. Here comes build number 4. This one ended up feeling a bit like a cabin in the woods type of theme. I went with a bit of an odd palette this time and tried prismarine for the roof, lined with dark oak. I felt it kind of worked, so continued on. I didn't want the roof to be the same A-frame as the last build, so I went for more of a shallow triangle style, which flattens the build and turned it into that cabin vibe. Of course, the stripped dark oak wood on the house base also helped carry this through. I added these little spikes on top of the roof as a bit of detailing, and they kind of resemble little antennas. This adds to the scene, as you'll typically see some sort of dish or antenna on country themed houses. Going off this, I transformed the side path more into a trodden and worn path, placing the house into more of a natural, focused environment. Curving it also adds more elements of interest instead of keeping it straight and stale. I added my typical stone wall edging along the path and begun on the tower. I honestly wasn't too sure how to tackle it, as my concept was really rather focusing on a flattened, humbled cabin abode. In the end, I decided to extend the base layout around the back of the jungle tree to add something to that middle space, as well as give it more of an interesting shape overall. I also felt like removing at least one floor of the tower was preferable to really work within the scene I was aiming for. It was just too tall. Moving on from that, all we had to do was add small details around the exterior like a campfire and plant life. And then we could move on to the back of the build. Overall, the problems around the back involved the lack of interest in the roof and depth in the build itself. To fix this, I added a squished A-frame that hovered over the back balcony, as well as some extra windows and roofing pieces on the first floor. I also added a little side door for the residents of the house to use as they desire. Adding a few extra block variants into the walls helps break up the solid tone and block of colour in one location. I did this by adding in my dark oak planks and stripped dark oak as a second floor lining. Of course, we had to add in a nice, smoking hot chimney to keep that house nice and warm. I'm sorry, that was bad. This was done by adding a campfire on one square of the 2x2 chimney, then surrounding it with trapdoors to hide it. In order to keep them in theme and not out of place, I added in a line of stripped wood to carry the brown down a bit further. After cleaning up the terrain a smidge, we're done with that one. So now we're on to the last design. This was actually attempt number 2 of this theme. If you've been following me for a little while, you may know that modern is not a theme I often desire to make, and tend to avoid it. It's certainly not my strongest suit, but I wanted to give it a go anyway. From what I've seen, it's likely the most built structural theme in Minecraft, which I find quite interesting. Regardless, the inspiration I pulled up mostly focused on right angles and square type shapes throughout the build, so I carried this into my own. Luckily for me, everything was already basically square, so I just had to adapt that and add valid points of interest for this. For the palette, I went for the typical whites and greys, but incorporated some brown into it to add a small splash of colour. In the end, the original doorway was turned into a garage door, and the entrance was moved slightly to the side, nestled in the spruce planks. Now, I will add a disclaimer here that I haven't redone essentially any of the interior on these transformations, but I will include them in the world download if you would like to explore and mess around with the designs yourself. Continuing on, I incorporated the spruce planks into the roof, so the colour is present in multiple areas of the build. A general rule I go by is that a block must be used in several places of the scene to give it a sense of belonging and follow through. This balances out the colour, yet allows for the nice contrast between blocks. I also added my typical greenery for another ounce of colour within. When it came to transforming the tower, I didn't alter the overall shape too much, but did find myself punching out a few supports to give it that modern float feel to it. Following through to the back of the scene, I decided to do a bit more and added a bit of a decking with a pool and chairs. I felt like the modern vibe it had going for it molded less with the natural terrain, so I created a situation for it to exist within. However, I did add in a few extra vanilla trees around the place to make it seem like it was nestled on top of a cozy hill, overlooking suburbia or something. But it's honestly all down to your imagination. With that said, that is all 5 transformations complete. This took a lot longer to do than I thought, so I do apologize for the delay in its release. I'd also just like to mention again that this world will be available for download below, just in case you guys would like to try transforming it for yourself. If you do, please show me on any of my social links in the description, as I'd love to see and put it in one of my future videos with credit to you. Anyway guys, if you have any feedback or suggestions, please let me know in the comments below, as I'm always trying to improve to release better content that you may enjoy. I'm still getting used to this voiceover thing, so I'd love to know your thoughts on how it came out. Now before I say my outro line, I would also like to say thank you guys for 50,000 subscribers. Wasn't the last video that I was just talking about 28,000 or 29,000? Wow. Thank you so much for all the feedback and support on my last video. I really want to get into this stuff and hopefully continue to make content that you guys might enjoy. So thank you guys so much for all the support and all the love, and I'll hopefully have more content out for you guys a little bit more frequently than this, I'm hoping. Anyway, thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys! Bye!